I know Corey has already introduced me, but I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Ellen Stocks, originally from kind of all over. Perks of being a preacher's kid, you grow up in lots of different places, but I really claim the Carolinas as home. But for the last 5 years, I've lived in Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee. It's kind of on that funky state line. My husband, Kevin, like he mentioned, is serving currently as the family pastor, doing youth and children at First Free Will Baptist Church there in Bristol. And so we've been there about 5 years. And so when I first moved there, it was in June of 2017. So we were 6 months married and starting out in full-time ministry. And I had messaged a lady from the church there that I knew worked in foster care. And I thought she worked on behalf of the state. And so I had sent her a message asking if I could get a job application. I needed a job. And she had shared with me that she worked at Free Will Baptist Family Ministries in their foster care department. Now, as a faithful Free Will Baptist my whole life, I said, "What's that?" Because I had never heard of it. In my mind, Family Ministries was a children's home. And I did not realize the vast array of ministries. I want to say thank you, too, for sharing Jim McComas with us. He always claims you guys as home. And for those of you that know him personally, he's the real deal. And he has such a heart for this ministry. And to steal a phrase from him, he says Family Ministry services from birth to the grave, from cradle to the grave. And that really is true, because we have crisis pregnancy centers, we have foster care, we have children's homes, we have a residential program for drug and alcohol for some teenage boys. And then we also have several different nursing home and assisted livings. So it really covers just the whole family, hence Family Ministries. So I have served there. I'm working as a family specialist, which is what they call case managers, from July of 2017 up until the following July of 2019. And at that time was getting ready to give birth to a little girl. And so I had stepped away. I said, I'm going to stay home and care for her for a little bit, but would still associate and conversate and show up to different events. And they asked me in the beginning of 2020 to come back, and I couldn't stay away. So I showed back up. And so all in all, I've been working there for about 3 years total. And so I've had just a wonderful experience. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my heart tonight, why I love foster care, and then really what our need is. That's really the big question that we get when someone mentions foster care is usually, I don't know how you could do that. And then it's followed up with, well, how can I help? So when I was a little girl, really in those formative years of late elementary going into middle school, my dad, which they're here tonight, so I'm going to embarrass them a little. My dad stepped away from pastoring to step back into full-time ministry, working at a Free Will Baptist children's home there in South Carolina. And up until that point, my idea of the world had really been shaped within the walls of church. I attended a Christian school for a little while and then went into public school in the 4th grade. So foster care was foreign to me. The idea of kids that didn't have mom and dads who loved them was foreign to me. I was very blessed to be in a home with parents that loved me, and I didn't have to question that. And so when we stepped into the role at the children's home and started working with the state of South Carolina, the first thing I realized was the world was a lot darker than I thought it was at a young age. And then the second thing I realized was that I was crazy about those kids. And one of the things about me, whether it's a good trait or a bad trait, is sometimes I'm just all in. I'm an all-in kind of person, which sometimes means I stay up till late hours of the night watching a TV show because I'm all in. I can't stop. It also means when it came to the children's home, even though we didn't live on the property, we lived close by, that I was there up until bedtime. I ate my meals there, I played there, we're there with the kids, and mom and dad will say that they were there too. And there were these 3 children that we loved all of them, but there were 3 that we were really close to. And I remember following their case and thinking to myself, they even came with us, one of the little boys, for a holiday one time, believing they would be with me forever. They were going to live in my home, they were going to be my siblings, I was going to love them the rest of my life. And that didn't work out. They had, at that time, a family member step in since they've been adopted. But I remember the day that the DCS state van came to pick them up from the children's home. And I remember watching them get into a van and being driven away. And I remember just squalling. I mean, an ugly mess, crying and wanting to just, like in the movies, run after the van. And Dad telling me, that we did all we could, that we loved him when we had him, and we had to trust that God would do the rest. And I was mad. I was mad because at that time at 12, 13, what can I do, other than just cry? And so I was like, we should do something. We should do something. And his thing was, well, there's nothing we can do. And that also was not good for me because I'm stubborn, and I think I get that honest, if those of you who have dealt with my dad. And so I told you I'd embarrass you tonight. And so I said in my soul, I was like, I'm going to do something about it. I just couldn't stand the fact that there were kids out there that were going to terrible situations, and I didn't have a say-so. So I determined in my heart at 12 years old, I'm going to change it. I'm going to fix it. And so then as I got older and people, they start asking, what are you going to do when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And so I would say, I'm going to work in foster care. I want to be a social worker. Usually the next comment was, oh, you don't want to do that. It is going to be awful. You're going to get your heart broken. Then you're going to get jaded because you're going to be so sad. That's just not what you want to do. But like I said, I'm an all-in kind of person. And so I said, that is what I'm going to do. And almost I'm going to prove you wrong because I'm not going to be jaded. I'm going to stick to this. So then I went on and went to Welch and got a psychology degree there and did some internships, always with the idea that I'm going to work in foster care. So when I found out about Family Ministries, the idea of Free Will Baptist owning an agency was just a perfect fit. And so for those of you who were like me, who had no idea Free Will Baptist, especially the state of Tennessee, owns a foster care agency, the cool thing about it is they partner with the state, but actually they have such a great reputation with the state of Tennessee that when Tennessee gets a phone call of children that have come into custody, they don't have any homes. They're running out of homes, and some of the homes they have are not great quality. So they'll call what they call a private provider, which is what Family Ministries are. And so they'll call us and they'll say, this is the situation. We've got these children or this sibling group or this kid, and this is the kind of home they need. Do you have any homes available? And in fact, just a few months ago, we had a phone call of a child that had come into custody, and they were going to be placing him into a home that had two dads. And the child had grown up in church, thankfully. Parents had passed away, which was why he was in custody. And he was adamant to his state worker that he needed to be in a Christian home. And so the state worker called Family Ministries and said, listen, we know you're a Christian agency. This kid is begging to be placed in a Christian home. Do you have any homes open? And thankfully at the time we did, but I hate to tell you, I wish I could come and tell you that we have thousands of homes and there's no children sitting in an office, and that's just not the case. We actually are full. All of the homes that we have even taken in extra beds because our foster parents have such wonderful hearts. And they are full. They've met their cap. And so now we're having to do the unfortunate thing of when they call, tell them, I'm sorry, we don't have any room. And you would think that would mean they just go on down to the next part of the list. Okay, well, if you don't have room, so-and-so over here has room. But actually, in the state of Tennessee right now, there are less than half the amount of foster homes to children. In fact, the last statistic, which was taken in 2016, shows that there are about 50,000, a rough estimate, 50,000 children in state's custody right now, which this was several years ago, so I'm sure the number has increased. And yet there's only about 8,000 foster homes. Now, I know that there's some of those kids are siblings, so they get placed together, but that's still I'm not great at math, but I know that those numbers don't add up. 8,000 to 50,000, that just doesn't work. But I do know that there are more than 50,000 churches in the state of Tennessee. And so if just one family from every church in the state of Tennessee said, I'll be a foster home, there'd be no more kids. There'd be no more kids sitting in an office because, like I said, the state of Tennessee, what they do is if they don't have a foster home, the workers stay in the office with the children. They pull pack and plays out of a closet, or they'll take a couch and pull it into like a pull-out bed, and children sleep in offices until someone can open their home. And if they can't, they stay in offices. The last I heard, the kids they called about this weekend that we didn't have a home were going on their 4th night in an office. And one of the kids, it was a sibling group, one of them is 3. Now, I have a 3-year-old, and she's very particular about where she sleeps. And sleep is a big issue in our house. It's hit or miss. And I cannot imagine her sleeping in a rollaway cot pulled out of a closet with people she doesn't know in an office with fluorescent lighting. I don't think she would do well. And so I can't imagine these other children are doing well. So I wanted to share with you what opportunities we have. And for those of you that the Lord has been dealing in your heart of, how can I help? Because this is a crisis. And we as believers hold life to be precious. And so that means from the start of conception, we believe life is precious, all the way up till the day that they pass. And so that means foster care, we've got to do something with that number. So with that being said, I'll tell you that there are about 3 big fears I hear when people say they're thinking about fostering or they're praying about fostering. There's typically 3 big fears. So I wanted to read a verse of scripture for you first, one that touches on all of these fears. And it's one of my favorite verses found in 2 Corinthians, and I'm sure it's a favorite for you. And it's in chapter 12. And it says, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" So one of the first fears that I typically hear is an age issue. That either people are like, I don't think I'm old enough to foster, whether it's because the children they have aren't very old yet, so they're like, I don't have a lot of parenting experience, or because they've already parented, and they're like, I don't think I would be a good foster parent age because I'm now a grandparent, or I've already raised my children, and I don't think I could do it again. So the state of Tennessee requires their minimum is 25 or 21 years old. They require you to be 21, and that's pretty much it. And I will tell you, with Family Ministries, we have foster families that start. We had a lady start as a single woman, 21. The day she turned 21, she opened her home because she was passionate about it. I had a foster home, and I'll tell you a lot of stories tonight just because that's also in my DNA. For those who know my dad, he also tells a lot of stories. So if it bothers you, blame him after the service. But one of the foster homes I had, one of the first homes I ever had, was the Gamble home. And this was a preacher and his wife that had 3 children that were all in their 30s. And they lived next door to one of their grown daughters and her spouse and their grandchildren. And somehow they were connected through Family Ministries, and the Lord started working in their heart. And so they said, well, we'll foster, but we're only going to take teenagers because our grandkids are like 5 and 6, and we can't go through that again. Well, then they got a call about these 2 twins that were a year old. And they couldn't say no. But they said, we're just going to do this temporarily. Because foster care really has 2 sides. You have a temporary side of a case that is going to return to a family member, whether it's to a parent that is able to complete their action steps or a relative steps in. Sometimes there's a grandparent out there or an aunt and uncle that are heartbroken for their relative. But the other side of foster care is the case never resolves, and so it goes towards adoption. So the Gamble home, they had said, we are not adoptive, we are temporary, that's all we're going to do. But then they fell in love with these kids, and they loved these little twins. They watched them grow up, and 1 month turned into 2 months, turned into 3 months, turned into several years. And now these 2 twins are 8 years old, and they've been adopted. So they had to, and then you would think that would stop their journey there. They would say, listen, we said teenagers, now we take little twins, so we're going to have to do even more than this. But then they started taking in teenage boys. And then a teenage boy came to their home that they fell in love with and just integrated into their family. So then they adopted him too. So then their family grew by 3, and then they still didn't stop. They continued to take children in, but they said at that time, for sure, temporary, we cannot adopt again, this is it. And so now they just offer respite care and things for our kids, but they have had an insane amount of children come through their home. And they'd be the first to tell you that although they don't find it as easy maybe to run around after small children as they did when their own kids were that age, that they have found it easy to love them. And the Lord has been so good to them and sustained them, and they don't regret it in the slightest. I know I could speak for them. So if age or experience or maybe lack of experience is what holds you back, to that I would say, like the verse said, listen, the Lord takes your weaknesses or what you see as weaknesses, and he uses that for his glory. And even like the songs like we sang earlier, really it's just willingness, a special heart that's willing to do this. The second fear I hear fairly often is a fear of, this is going to destroy my family. They have kids of their own, and so they're like, I just don't think my kids could handle the heartbreak of kids coming in and being there a few months and then going home. Or that fear of welcoming kids with traumatic past into their home. And man, what if something bad happens to my children? What if, some of that trauma seeps in and then now my kids are exposed? There's also another foster family that we have out in East Tennessee, another pastor's family, that they just started with us just a few months ago. Something that God had been dealing with them for a while. They had helped care for some family, and the Lord just kept eating away at their spirit, telling them they needed to do something. And so they opened their doors, and the first 2 kids they had, and for those of you who've gotten the newsletter, some of these stories might be already in your brain, but they got these 2 little kids, a little boy and a little girl, and we'll refer to the little girl as W. And so W came in, and she was a spitfire. She's one of those kids, she's going to tell you how it is. And she's also one of those kids that we sometimes see grow into adults, that they're one-uppers, the kind of my horse is bigger than your horse situation. For example, one of the kids in the home, this pastor's family, they have 3 children of their own that are young. School, young, elementary age. Well, one of their bio children lost a tooth, and W, not to be outdone, said her tooth was loose, when in fact it wasn't. And she pulled out an entire crown off her tooth because she was going to have a loose tooth too. So as you could tell, she was giving them a run for their money. And she was also one of those kids that asks 1,000 questions. She's got a question about everything. Well, they had placed her, the way their house was designed, they had a girl room and a boy room, and then obviously the parents in their own room. So they had a set of bunk beds, and they have 2 daughters of their own, 2 biological daughters. And so they 2 were in the room with W. And the girls' bedroom is in the layout. It's right next to the living room, and the walls are real thin so you can hear everything. And so the foster parents were sitting in the living room one night, and they were just chatting and winding. It was the evening, and they could hear the girls in their room, and they're talking and playing. And they heard W asking their daughter what her dad does for a living. What does being a preacher mean? And really the big issue was the fact that they have to go to church every single week. She just couldn't understand why they do that all the time. And so the foster parents, honestly, at that point were just amused and wanted to see how their 8-year-old would answer all these questions, but how this girl is questioning church. And for their daughter, they were upfront with me, she's not been exposed to this world. So for her to be face to face with a little girl who's never been in church, it was 2 forces meeting each other. But their daughter just shared what they do at church, and why she likes church, and why she goes. But see, their daughter, just a few weeks before, had accepted Christ as her Savior. And so it's on the forefront of her mind. And Jesus himself talks about how we have to have that childlike faith. And, children, they'll tell anybody anything. They often embarrass you. They just spill your business. But that overflows when they're a Christian. They want to tell everybody. And so they're talking about church. And so their daughter just starts sharing that she recently accepted Jesus as her Savior. And so, of course, W's like, what does that mean? So in the way that a child can understand it, another child explains exactly what salvation is. And the foster parents are sitting in the living room, and the foster dad will tell you he was just sitting there crying. Tears just streaming down his face, listening to his child witness to another child. And then he heard it get quiet, which is usually not a good sign. For those of you that have children, quiet is often not good. And then he heard the sound of little feet come down the hallway, and there was W. And she sat on the couch, and she didn't say anything for a while. And then she says, I got a question. He said, okay. She said, I just want to know if God's mad at me. And he said, well, what do you mean? And she said, because I didn't go to church, and I didn't do all those things, and I think God might be mad at me. And so with tears still on his face, he shared how God loved him despite his circumstances, despite who he was, how God loves all of us, and the beautiful gift of salvation. And so kind of following up with what his daughter had already done, the little girl then starts to cry. And so right there in their living room, where just a few weeks before she had walked in the first time, W gave her life to Christ. And since then, she's moved on to another place. But I could tell you countless stories of children that have come through our doors that have gotten saved. The family I shared with you earlier, the older couple, they had a teenage boy come into their home that they'll tell you they took a risk on. When they read the report of what the kind of kid that was and his history, they were nervous. But he came in and was excellent. They led him to the Lord, saw him be baptized. And after he left their home, he aged out of foster care and went on. Recently, within the last 6 months, he got in a car accident and passed away. And I got to listen to this foster mom share of how devastated she was, but how comforting it was for her to know that those few short months he was in her home changed him forever. And we love to say that we've changed people's lives forever, but this did. I mean, this kid's eternity, he's in heaven now. He doesn't have to worry about a home anymore. So I would say to you, using both of those examples, if your fear is how this is going to affect your family or the worry it's going to change your kids, I'll tell you it will. It's going to affect your whole family, and not just the ones in your home, extended families. I could share countless stories of foster grandparents or foster aunt and uncles, and even churches that have rallied around these foster families and have also fallen in love with these kids. So it does change your family, but I will tell you, I firmly believe, I heard my parents say this often, when we would get ready to move to a new area or started a new ministry, that God didn't just call my dad to ministry, that he called our whole family, and that he gifted my sister and I to this family with our unique gifts and talents, knowing that we could help their ministry. And I believe that to be true. I believe that if God calls a mom and a dad, he calls their kids. And he's going to call your family. If you think that God's calling you into foster care, he's already worked in the hearts of those around you to call them along too. The last fear that I typically hear is the fear of getting your heart broken. The people tell me, I think I'm going to get too attached, that I'm going to love these kids and pour myself into them, and then I'm going to leave, and I just don't think I could stomach that. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's hard, because you love these kids, you invest in them, and seeing them leave is difficult. Now, I will tell you, society is, as you all know, we're in a bad news kind of society. We like to only talk about bad news. So typically when people talk about foster care, they only talk about the bad stuff, the awful cases, the horrible situations that kids then go back to horrible situations. But I'll tell you, working 3 years in the system, I could count on one hand how many cases I've had that have gone a way I didn't really expect, or a way that really left me sad. Maybe 3 or 4 out of at least 100 over the years that I've worked on and helped be a part of. So to me, that's pretty good odds to know that really, despite what people tell you, really the majority of these cases are having successful somethings. It might be successful adoptions, and we rejoice. Might be successful, they go to a grandparent or an aunt and uncle, and they get to be with a family, and we rejoice. And sometimes it's successful, what we call reunifications, when whatever home they were taken from, the state, what they do is when a child is removed, they create a permanency plan, and they list out all of these action steps that whatever that identified caregiver, so mom or dad or whoever had custody, all these steps that they have to do to get their child back. And when a parent has successfully completed those steps, and they have a lot of safeguards in place, there's visitation that has to happen, and even the child themselves get a say-so. But once all these things have been completed and all of it is presented as evidence to a judge, then a judge determines if a child goes home. And oftentimes when it gets to that point that they go back to a mom or dad, as workers especially, but even as foster homes, we rejoice because we get to see families just being redeemed. We get to see broken pieces be put back together. And I'll tell you, as someone who started off doing this, I mean, I still am young, but very young. It was my first real big girl job. When I first started, I saw everything real black and white. You had good parents and you had bad parents, and that was it. And so that first year and a half, really, that year that I worked there, I hate to tell you, but I really did my work under that worldview, that there were good parents and there were bad parents. And that's how I did my cases, how I interacted. I loved those kids. I loved those foster families. But when it came to the bio families, I really struggled because I'd be so angry with them. You know, how could you do what you did? How could you make those choices? And then I come back to work the second time, and I don't know if it's just the hormones of after having a child and how it just changes your life forever. You know, I'll cry at commercials now. I don't know if that's what it was, but you know that game that you play as a kid, Operation, and they have the tweezers and you go in to pick something out? I sometimes think conviction is like that. That, you know, sometimes there's times when the Lord picks something out and you hear it touch the side and it just buzzes slightly. And there's sometimes I think the Lord holds those tweezers there and you just hear it buzz consistently. That's what I felt when I went back to work. The Lord just held those tweezers, and it was just buzzing over the fact that these are human beings. And if I'm going to love these children, and I'm going to want the Lord to fix their broken pieces, and if I'm going to want the Lord to make my family knitted together and look more like Jesus, I can't sit back and rejoice for someone else's family to be broken apart. I can't say both of those things. So the Lord just started doing this huge work in my own heart. And so then and I asked her permission before I shared this story, because she truly is a friend now. During this time, the Lord holding those tweezers, enter my friend Crystal. And at the time I met Crystal, we were really on opposite sides of this case. She was the bio mom to 2 children that were in one of my foster homes out in Mountain City, which in Northeast Tennessee, it's pretty much the smallest, furthest away town you can get. There's no cell reception, and if I go there, I'm there all day long. And so one of my foster homes there, they are been foster homes for years and have had countless children through their doors, become good, dear friends of mine. They had these 2 children in their home, R and S, or R and B, and they were great kids. They were young, 8 and 6 at the time. And when I first took over this case, I had been working some other ones, and we had a worker leave, so there's often a shuffle in foster care. I like to say it's kind of like being in a wave pool, that sometimes it's enjoyable, and then sometimes you're being flipped upside down. That's often how the system is, that sometimes you're like, I know what's going to happen, and then sometimes you're like, what in the world? So I jump in to take this new case, and it had been going since September. Well, this is April at this point, so I'm several months behind. And so when I start off in a case, regardless of where it is at the time, I like to start calling all the players involved because I want all the information, and typically different people, have different opinions. So I called the foster home, talked with the foster mom and dad, met with the children, got to know them, talked to the state workers and the attorneys, just really getting a feel for the case. And then it was time to call this mom. And like I'll tell you, the Lord had those tweezers of conviction going off when I got ready to call her. And so what I usually would have just done is like a straightforward phone call. I called this lady, Crystal, and I introduced myself and told her I'd be working on her children's case, and if she had any questions to contact me. Now, I'll give you a little bit of information. At the time, I had been told that this lady had a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness, and that, be careful because you're going to work with her and she's going to fight you the whole way. So I did not expect this phone call to go well. But she was respectful, and I just kind of went over the different materials, papers I had to go through, and that was kind of the end of that. And I thought, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And so then that conversation would turn into a few more conversations, and each time I kept waiting for this woman that they had told me, this lady who's just full of anger, to show up. And I never saw it. It never showed up. And then the judge issued for visitation to start. So we started doing what the state does, is they require usually 4 hours a month of visitation with the parent. And sometimes that's done via video call, sometimes that's done in person. And so typically what we do as an agency is we'll break that up into 2 days, usually every other week for 2 hours. And we'll meet at a McDonald's or a Burger King or a park. And for 2 hours, the kids get to play with their parents under the supervision of a worker. And we're taking notes and detailing things, intervening if needed. So we start doing these visits. Well, at the time, this is in the height of COVID, the first go-round. So everything was done via video call. And so I really expected we're going to have these video calls, and this is going to be just atrocious. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to make an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old sit still for 2 hours, staring at one screen. Not really the best. So I was like, this is not going to be good. But, I noticed the mom was trying. She had some toys there. She was trying to show them. She was talking with them. And it was through this conversation we discovered that Crystal was pregnant. And so she was sharing, her recent doctor's appointment and things. Well, after that phone call, I talked to the foster mom because we were both kind of taken aback at how she was pregnant. And the foster mom, she said, I don't know, Ellen, if this is going to sound crazy, but God has really been working in my heart, and I think I need to love her. And I was like, that's crazy because he's been doing that to me too. And I really just feel like this mom needs just a little bit extra encouragement. And so this sweet foster mom, she started making a point of reaching out to Crystal. She would send her pictures of the kids throughout the week, cute little outfits or them dressed up at church. And the kids were part of a kids choir, so foster mom would record it and then send it on. So through all of this, we're watching this mom really start to open up. She's talking to us more and more. So then I really start praying that the Lord would show me a way to present the gospel to her. But with that, even though we're a Christian agency, as a worker, I don't have as much freedom as foster parents. Foster parents, they can take the children to church. They have the opportunity, they can talk with these bio families about the Lord. But there's a risk you take as a worker if you're going to talk to a bio family about the Lord, knowing that the state could, if they wanted to, get angry and say that we're imposing beliefs or that, I'm having inappropriate conversations and ask for me to be removed from a case or, heaven forbid, remove the children from our care. Now, I haven't ever heard of that happening, but it's one of those things, similar to being a teacher nowadays, that you have to be strategic in how you share the gospel. And so I just started praying, Lord, you're going to have to help me. So as we started talking, one of the things that I do often, for good or for bad, is I'll use personal examples when I'm talking to these families. Now, I don't give out, intimate details. They don't know where I live or how to come find me, but I'll talk about my life, because I've noticed if I talk to them and treat them like the human being they are, they respond the same way, and then we don't have that animosity that you often hear about. So as she was preparing to have her baby, I just started sharing about what my experience was like when I was pregnant with my little girl. And then she was sharing about the different needs she has. And this was a single mom. She was doing this alone. And she was scared. And so she was sharing her fear of, not having enough stuff when the baby came home. So I knew we had a visit coming up. At this time, we had moved to in-person. So I went home, went through my hundreds of baby clothes that I've kept because I just can't bear to throw them away. And I pulled out some outfits for my own little girl. And at the next visit, I showed up with a little gift bag. Now, they were all secondhand. They weren't all brand new, but it had an assortment of clothes and little blankies and socks, just things to get her started. And she was so appreciative, but she was so shocked, almost like, okay, why are you doing this? But I just felt so strongly that the Lord wanted me to let her know that she was worthy of love too. And so we kept having conversation after conversation, and through those she shared that she had grown up Catholic and that she had this deep fear that because of the bad choices she had made, that God no longer loved her. And she was so fearful to get her children back that she was going to mess them up. And so it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, Lord, is this when I start sharing? And is this gonna go south? So I did. I just shared the gospel and shared how, thankfully, the Lord does not keep a tally system, and that when it's under the blood, it's under the blood. And so I just started sharing her my own personal testimony, what I'd seen God do in my own family. And this was a lady who I recalled, as I was talking to her, I recalled reading through these case files. And there's hundreds of documents in these files. And it was in that conversation the Lord brought to mind that up until 6 months before the children were taken into custody, that this mom, her little boy, B, had autism. And at the time, my little girl now has been diagnosed, but at the time she hadn't been. And I remembered reading in those case files that up until 6 months before they came into custody, that mom was at every single therapy appointment every week. She was at every school conference. She was at all the doctor's appointments. The kids played recreational soccer. And it was the Lord brought that to mind because she was so sorrowful that she had not been a good parent. And so I reminded her of the things she had done. And it was that little bit of encouragement, that little bit of me telling her that she was not a bad parent. She just made some bad decisions. That she began to share the circumstances that led her into the lifestyle that led her away from her kids. She had gotten with a man who was not of the Lord and was abusive to her and her children. And she had turned to different substances to try to fill that void she was feeling. And then obviously her children entered into custody. And at that point, she had been celebrating sobriety for almost a year. So we knew the case was progressing. We knew the mom was doing what she was supposed to do. She had gotten all these things done. And so we had court at the beginning of December of this past year. And the judge said, okay, well, I'm pleased with what the mom's doing, so at the end of the month, I'll let these children go home. And at this point, these kids had been at the same foster home for over a year, from September of one year till December of the next. So naturally, these foster parents were upset, but they had built this relationship with this mom, so they felt confident that she was going to do okay. And I had many conversations with this foster mom of what we could do to make this transition smooth. Smooth for the children, smooth for this mom who was so terrified out of her mind. At this point, she had a brand new baby. How we could let her know that she was going to be okay. And one thing, too, the state of Tennessee does that is wonderful. When kids go home, they don't just turn their back on them. They require for usually up to 3 to 6 months of services be provided in the home. And oftentimes we get the opportunity to do that, where we're going every single week checking on those kids, checking on those families. So it really is structured well to where if there's any issues, there's that safety valve there to pull those kids back. So we started planning how we would do this transfer. And the bio mom, Crystal, invited myself and the foster family to take the kids to her home and help get them set up in their rooms. And the whole time we were there, I just had this tug deep in my heart that there was something still I needed to do, something still I needed to do. So we all eat dinner together before it's time to go. And we're getting ready to leave. And Crystal's telling her goodbyes to the foster family, and she's just weeping, thanking them for what they've done. And she makes the statement where she says, I just don't know why God would be so nice to me by making sure my kids were in a great home when I've just done so many bad things. And the foster dad just began to share his own testimony, a time where he did not live walking with the Lord, and how the Lord saved him in his brokenness, and how he had turned from God and had redeemed him and given him a beautiful family. And so then just shared it how, God's in the redemption business, and that's the whole purpose of the gospel. And we were at a Cracker Barrel, and so it was on the front porch of a Cracker Barrel that my sweet friend Crystal gave her life to Christ. And we got to watch not just a family be reunified in the physical sense, but we got to see a child be reunited with her spiritual father. And I will tell you, I wish that was the story every single time. I wish every single case ended with a whole family coming to Christ. It's not always the case. Now, my sweet friend Crystal got to come to church with me with all of her children and sit in the pew, and it brought me such joy to introduce her to my church family as my friend. And not just my friend, but now my sister in Christ. She's doing wonderful. The children have almost been home a full year. This December, they'll celebrate a full year and are excellent. And not only are they doing well, but they go and spend the night at their foster home, usually once a month, because the little boy refers to that as his other mommy. And they have kept that friendship up. And I believe, outside of the grace of the Lord, that it's been through that friendship that this mom has remained stable, has been able to continue to do the things she needed to do, and we've been able to see this family just grow. So I wish I could tell you that every case is like that. It's not. I wish I could tell you you'll never get your heart broken, or that you're going to love these children and they'll be yours forever. And that's just not the case. But I know that God loves them too. And I know that it grieves his heart that there are kids sitting in offices on rollaway cots with no place to go, when there are plenty of homes, not just in America, in our state, in our county, in our churches, that have an extra bed. They have a bedroom that doesn't have anyone in it. They have a room that could fit bunk beds. And so they have empty beds when there are kids needing one. So my prayer for you today is this. I pray that you will find a way for your family to be able to minister to foster care. Maybe that's rallying around foster families in your area. Tennessee also has a great program, actually with Stephen Curtis Chapman, the Christian singer, about helping foster families. He's very passionate about foster care and adoption. So maybe what God's telling you to do is, I can cook for a foster family, I can babysit for them, I can write letters to them. Maybe it's through with the gracious offering today that will actually go specifically to buying Christmas presents for our kids in foster care this year. We usually have churches that do like an angel tree, and we don't just like to buy gifts for our foster kids. We usually buy them for the biological kids too, as a way of thanking them for all the ways they've loved on these kids. But because of COVID, last year, churches did not feel comfortable. We usually have this large party, and they get to actually give the gifts to the kids themselves. But we didn't have churches sign up last year, so we had one church at the time raise money through gift cards, and all of us workers divvied them up and we went and got gifts. But this year, that church is not able to do that. And so right now, as of today, I have not heard different. We don't have any churches lined up to be able to support Christmas for these children. And now our foster families, they'll do their best. But as you probably know, with children of your own, Christmas it's an ordeal. Usually you're traveling to see families, you're worrying about fixing meals, and you're trying to do presents and things too. And we're really big on these kids, through no fault of their own, are in the system. So we don't want to reinforce the idea that they're different. We want to treat them the way that we would treat our own kids, and Christmas is a great way to do that. So maybe that's how the Lord has spoken to you today is, I can't do much, but I can give a Christmas present. Maybe the Lord's spoken to you today because you have an empty bed. Maybe the Lord spoke to you today and you're telling me, I'm fearful, I'm scared of what could happen, but I'm willing to follow the Lord no matter what the fear is. And like that verse said, allow his grace to kind of go through and shine through those broken pieces and be used for his glory. So I'm excited to talk with you. I'm excited for what the Lord's going to do. I have loved being a part of Family Ministries foster care, watching how God has worked. And I could speak all night long on the ways he's working, and I believe he still has great plans. I believe there's people in this room that he wants to use for this ministry to further his kingdom. So I'm going to pray for you all tonight, and then I'll give it back over to Corey. But thank you for the opportunity to be here. I hope I haven't talked your ear off. I just love talking about these kids and what God is doing, and I'm excited to see how he'll use you.